I'm Isaac from The Mountain Takes. What you're about to watch is 10 climbers who didn't just die on Everest, they were killed by their own choices. A camera instead of oxygen, a deadline instead of humility, a forged permit instead of honesty, a lie instead of truth. And we're going to show you the exact moment each one realized the mountain doesn't negotiate with bank accounts or followers or excuses. We're also going to show you what their guides paid for those choices. Sit tight because the cost of these deaths extends far beyond the people who made them.
It was April 18, 2019, on the Nepal side of Mount Everest at 17,598 feet, where the air above a certain elevation doesn't feel like cold, it feels like pressure distributed against every exposed surface of your body. Brielle Mortensen had been there for 11 days and hadn't yet reached the elevation she needed for the content she came to get. She never would. Brielle was 28, a wellness and fitness influencer from Scottsdale, Arizona, with 156,000 followers watching her post gym selfies and motivational captions about limiting beliefs. Her sponsor was an electrolyte drink company. The brand launch was locked to a summit deadline, May 15th. She didn't summit by then, the deal fell apart. She told herself the deadline was fuel. It was actually a death sentence. She didn't know it yet. Her resume was thin. Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Aconcagua, all guided, all managed by outfitters who build safety like it's infrastructure. What she didn't mention publicly was how badly her body had struggled at every high camp. What she posted was the summit photos from her phone. Sherpa was 34. He'd summited Everest 5 times. He had 15 years of high-altitude work. His daughter was 6 years old and attended an English medium school in Kathmandu, the kind that costs money he only earned during climbing season. He'd calculated every expedition like an equation. This one was supposed to be simple. 6 more years of work, then he'd retire. From the moment Brielle arrived at base camp, Sherpa saw the type. The ones with sponsors were always tighter than the ones climbing for themselves. When she started talking about her May 15th deadline, during the acclimatization brief, he noted it. When she posted photos from Camp 1 before acclimatization was even finished, the pressure shifted. The first rotation to Camp 2 went badly. Her body swelled slightly mild edema in her fingers. By Camp 2, at 21,000 feet, her pace dropped by 40%. Sherpa watched her move like a metronome slowing down, and he knew she couldn't handle what came next. What she did was post a selfie with the caption, "Higher than my doubters can dream." The expedition leader brushed it off. The company had already collected the deposit. Refunding now meant money spent on permits and Sherpa wages already gone. Sherpa raised the concern again. The leader nodded and said nothing. Brielle's behavior escalated. She filmed at every camp transition. She'd stop to adjust her phone's angle while the rope team waited. She took 3 versions of the same photo at different exposures, trying to nail the lighting. Sherpa watched and said nothing. He'd learned. That confrontation at base camp never changed behavior at 23,000 feet. The mountain was the only argument that ever won. The summit push briefing came on May 3rd. Turnaround protocol was 1 p.m. Anyone past turnaround had to descend, period. This is mountaineering arithmetic. You have fixed hours of daylight, fixed calories, fixed oxygen. Sherpa and Brielle left Camp 4 at 11:47 p.m. on May 10th. By dawn, they were at the south summit. She stopped to film a sunrise video. The clock was already starting to lie. She reached the summit at 12:34 p.m., 26 minutes past turnaround. Sherpa looked at her and said one sentence, "We descend now," she said. 5 more minutes for photos. She took 40 minutes of photos. The weather was still clear, so the mind uses that as evidence that danger isn't real. But the mountain doesn't operate on what you see. It operates on what's coming. By the time they started descending, it was 1:14 p.m. At 2:47 p.m., approximately 200 meters above the south, Colonel, the serac broke. A serac is a block of ice, sometimes 30 feet, sometimes 100 feet. This one had been holding for 17 days. Today, the sun angle was wrong, or the wind stress was right, or the physics simply changed. Seracs don't announce themselves. The sound arrives after the movement. A climber 40 meters below described what he saw. The ice came straight down, not a slide, a collapse. The whole thing disintegrated into maybe 20 large chunks and 1,000 pieces of shrapnel. It spread across the whole route. Sherpa was still 5 meters above Brielle. He was clipped into the fixed line. The serac hit him across the left leg and left side of his body. His femur fractured with a sound the climber below also heard. He fell. The rope held him. Brielle was struck by secondary debris and knocked into a small crevasse offset from the main line. She fell 8 feet and stopped against ice walls. She was conscious. Her legs moved, but she was trapped, and when the adrenaline wore off, her hands were already starting to numb. The system doesn't pause for rescue. It does math. Tenzin Lama, the climber below, was now the rope leader. He could go down to Brielle, she was closer, maybe savable. Or he could stay with Furba, stabilize him, and wait for other climbers to come down and form a rescue chain. If Tenzin left Furba alone, Furba might die from shock. If Tenzin went to Brielle, she might also die, and then Furba would definitely die. Tenzin made the decision that defined his next 20 years. He stayed with Furba. They got Furba down. They looked down at where Brielle was trapped. The crevasse was narrow. The walls were ice. Any attempt to rappel would risk losing the rescue climber too, and they were running out of daylight. Tenzin stayed. Furba was lowered. Brielle stayed in the crevasse as the sun moved across the sky. She was conscious through the evening. Climbers above tried calling down to her. By morning, she was still, and her body temperature had stopped registering. Furba survived. His femur healed, but his climbing career ended at 34. The medical bills, the rehabilitation, his insurance barely covered it. His daughter's school tuition went unpaid for 6 months. His wife took a job in a hotel kitchen in Pokhara. The thing he'd calculated so carefully, 6 more years, then retirement had been deleted in the 8 seconds it took a Serac to fall. The mountain didn't distinguish between her choices and his. Plus. Now the next story isn't about a climber who made one catastrophic mistake. It's about someone who built an entire identity on a lie, and when the mountain tested that lie, there was nobody home to answer. It was April 25, 2018. On Mount Everest Northeast Ridge at 28,000 feet, where the air is thin enough that every decision moves slowly and every consequence arrives fast. Cassidy Whitmore was 26. From Boulder, Colorado, though she'd lived in Los Angeles building a TikTok presence, 234,000 followers. Her brand was Limits or Lies. The sponsor was a boutique adventure apparel company. They wanted her to climb the mountain, film it, and post real-time via satellite and fiber. What nobody told her, because it was implicit, is that real-time posting from 21,000 feet requires dividing your attention between staying alive and staying relevant. For Cassidy, those things had stopped being compatible somewhere. Around Camp 2, Pasang Sherpa was 31. 13 years of guiding, 5 8,000-meter summits. His 6-year-old son was born with a cleft palate. The surgery was scheduled for August in Kathmandu, a private clinic. Good reputation, high cost. Pasang's wife had asked him directly, "How many more expeditions until we can afford it?" He'd done the math. This expedition was number 4. One more good season and his son could get fixed. From base camp onward, Cassidy was filming. The landscape, the tents, the Sherpa porters. Every moment was potential content. The problem is that climbing Everest requires minute-by-minute presence. The mountain doesn't pause for brule. During the rotation to Camp 1, Pasang watched her stop to frame a shot of the Khumbu icefall. Standing on the rope, one hand on the line, the other on her phone, trying to get the angle right. A climber positioned above described seeing her standing on a suspect section of bridge, immobile, filming, for maybe 4 minutes. Pasang moved her bodily off the unstable ground. She laughed and said, "Did you see that shot?" At Camp 2, she set up a filming station. 45 minutes of meditation sequence with the mountain in background. While she was filming, her oxygen levels dropped. Her face paled. Pasang moved her to medical. It took 2 hours for her vitals to stabilize. He approached the leader. "She's not acclimatizing well. The filming is making it worse. She's distracted." The leader understood. The footage was exceptional. The satellite company was happy. The sponsor was happy. The only person with a problem was the person trying to keep her alive. The leader said he'd talk to her. Cassidy's response was gracious and public. "I totally understand. Safety first." Then she went back to her tent, edited her footage, and uploaded it via SatFi. 2 hours later, the video had 47,000 likes. The algorithm had spoken. The mountain was secondary. Pasang stopped raising concerns. He'd learned the politics. By April 23rd, the weather was favorable. Summit window opening. The camp made the call. She left Camp 4 at 11 p.m. on April 24th with Pasang and 2 other climbers. They moved reasonably fast. By dawn, they were on the upper northeast ridge. By noon, they were approaching the summit. Cassidy reached the summit at 12:34 p.m. The first thing she did was film a 360-degree video, turning in a complete circle with her phone extended. Pasang watched from behind her. He was tired. He was aware that turnaround was closing, that her standing on the summit ridge spinning in a circle was taking exactly the time they couldn't spare. He called out, "We need to move. Descent now," she said. "One more angle." She stepped backward to get a different perspective. Behind her, not visible, the cornice overhung the ridge by maybe 8 feet. The cornice is snow shaped by wind into a cantilever and overhang with nothing beneath it except a 2,000-foot vertical drop onto the Tibet side. She took one more step backward. The cornice fractured silently. Pasang saw her expression change a moment of confusion, like her brain had sent an "I'm falling" signal, but her body hadn't registered it. She disappeared, not dramatically, just gone. Pasang moved immediately to the edge. She was visible for maybe 30 feet of the drop, tumbling against snow. Then the surface curved away and he couldn't see her anymore. He keyed the radio. Cassidy has fallen, cornice collapse, she's gone. The search that followed was ceremonial. Her body wasn't recoverable from the Tibet side without permissions neither country wanted to grant. She stayed on the mountain. What did get recovered was her phone. The final video was still queued in the app, ready to post, waiting for a Sat-Fi connection. 2 hours later, when a climber reached base camp with the phone, the video was manually uploaded. It got 127,000 likes in the first 12 hours. Pasang didn't climb again for 2 years. He couldn't. The guilt had. His son's surgery was postponed. His wife had to find work. When he did finally return to guiding, he was different, stricter, more conservative. Climbers complained. He wouldn't let us summit, overly cautious. What he actually was someone who'd watched the algorithm kill someone and decided that no video was worth the weight of that memory. 2 years later, on the same mountain, a different kind of arrogance would show its face. This time, it wasn't about content. It was about entitlement, pure and simple.
On April the 24th, 2018, the sun rose over the Khumbu icefall, casting long blue shadows across a chaotic maze of shifting seracs and bottomless crevasses. The temperature at base camp was a biting 8 degrees Fahrenheit, but the air inside the heated dining tents was thick with the scent of French press coffee and expensive sunscreen. Among the clients was 27-year-old Brielle Tanaka, a brand strategist and lifestyle coach from Newport Beach, California. To her 55,000 social media followers, Brielle was the embodiment of the slogan, "Limits are lies." Her online persona was built on fearless exploration, displaying a highly curated progression from weekend hiking trips to high-altitude summits. Her marketing pitch was simple. She was a self-made woman, proving that traditional training structures were just artificial barriers designed to hold people back. That specific philosophy would be the engine of her destruction within less than 3 weeks. Brielle's climbing resume was a carefully manufactured fiction. To secure her spot with a mid-tier Kathmandu-based guiding agency, she had claimed prior technical summits on Aconcagua and Denali. In reality, she had participated in heavily guided, low-altitude treks, turning around long before reaching any real technical terrain. She believed that because she paid $45,000 for an all-inclusive expedition, the agency's staff would act as a human safety net. She assumed that high-altitude climbing was merely an endurance test, a matter of mental toughness rather than hard, technical proficiency. What she did next set the timeline that would ultimately seal her fate. She skipped the mandatory pre-expedition ice climbing clinics held at base camp, choosing instead to spend those afternoons filming promotional videos for a boutique adventure apparel brand. Assigning her to the mountain was 31-year-old Pasang Tamang. Pasang was a veteran high-altitude worker with 5 successful Everest summits to his name. He was quiet, methodical, and known among his peers for his conservative approach to risk management. This season was critical for Pasang. His younger sister had just been admitted to a prestigious medical school in Kathmandu, and her first year of tuition depended entirely on the summit bonus he would receive if Brielle reached the top and returned alive. The financial survival of an entire indigenous family was now bound to a client who could not correctly.
It was May 3, 2021, on the Nepal side of Mount Everest, where the weather window that opens in spring closes the moment it wants to, and nobody can argue with it. Mason Reinhold came from Park City, Utah. He was 31. He'd sold a tech startup in 2018 and decided that what he actually wanted was to explore. He called it that in interviews. What he meant was climbing mountains and posting about it, building a personal brand around altitude mindset and pushing limits. His resume was thin, an EBC track, low bush, guided Cho Oyu. What he didn't mention was that he'd attempted Everest before in 2019 and had turned around at 24,000 feet. He was carrying that failure like an extra oxygen bottle, rebranded as a learning experience. He'd started telling people he had summited Everest. He hadn't, not once. Pemba Tamang was 38. He'd been guiding for 18 years, 8 summits. He was also newly married 2 months, in fact. The apartment they'd bought in Kathmandu wasn't paid for yet. The marriage felt fragile in the way new marriages do, and this season's earnings were supposed to solidify it. From base camp onward, Mason treated the mountain like it owed him something. He moved fast during acclimatization because he carried the ego of someone who'd already been here in his mind. He challenged Pemba's pacing calls. He clipped into the fixed rope, carelessly sometimes without checking the carabiner, sometimes with an inverted gait. Pemba raised this with the expedition leader. He moves too fast, he doesn't check his clips. The leader listened. The leader had collected Mason's deposit, and Mason had already booked another expedition for September. The leader said he'd talk to him. He didn't, or he did, and Mason didn't hear it, heard it, and didn't care. By May 1st, the weather window opened. Climb now or wait another week. At 11:42 p.m. on May 2nd, Mason and Pemba and 3 other climbers left Camp 4 for the summit. Mason and Pemba reached the summit at 12:47 p.m. He spent 40 minutes filming. When it came time to descend, he moved too fast. Pemba called for him to slow. Mason said he was fine. At 1:23 p.m., they were descending from the south summit, moving toward the south col. The snow was wet. May sun had been intense, and the bridges were getting thinner. The hazard brief had mentioned this. Crevasse fields are at peak danger from 1 p.m. onward. Don't trust the snow bridges. Mason wasn't afraid. He'd been this high before. He knew how to move. He had the certainty of someone who'd never actually been here. At 1:47 p.m., his foot went through. The crevasse was maybe 6 feet wide. The bridge had held maybe 200 climbers that season. Today, it held 1 less. He fell, and the rope came taut. Pemba was the anchor above. Then the carabiner failed. Not from the impact it failed, because Mason had clipped it inverted, and the gate had opened on the shock load. Pemba felt the rope go slack. He heard Mason cry out once, then nothing. A climber above Pemba couldn't see into the crevasse. Nobody could. Pemba rappelled down 15 feet and looked. Nothing but ice and darkness. He keyed the radio. Climber has fallen. Crevasse entry, no contact. The rescue chain took 40 minutes to form. By the time the first additional climber was rappelling in, it was 2:30 p.m. They descended maybe 30 feet. They saw rope, a jacket. They didn't see Mason. The next morning, they found him 40 feet down, wedged in a narrows, dead for approximately 14 hours. The expedition company investigated. Their report noted, climber's carabiner showed improper clipping, inverted gait documented, climber responsible for own safety checks. What they didn't note was that Mason had moved recklessly, that Pemba had called for a slower pace, that Mason had dismissed every warning. Pemba's first thought when the rope went slack was, I'm going to be blamed for this. His second thought was, my wife. Pemba continued guiding, but something had changed. When he looked at other clients, he saw the carabiner that had opened. He knew that Mason had been carrying the failure forward, the lie about past summits, the dismissal of guidance, the certainty that the mountain couldn't touch him. The lie had gotten him killed. It had gotten Pemba 15 minutes of terror he'd carry for life. 3 years before Mason, there was a climber who made a different kind of mistake. She wasn't lying about her experience. She was just convinced that sharing the moment mattered more than protecting it.
Mount Everest does not care about your follower count, your corporate performance metrics, or the marketing promises you made to your clothing sponsors. The mountain operates on a brutal, unchanging arithmetic of pressure, oxygen, and time. When inexperienced climbers treat those variables as negotiable, the mountain quietly removes their choices. The 5 individuals we are profiling today believed that paying a premium guiding agency guaranteed a safe return. They didn't realize until it was far too late that a luxury base camp tent cannot protect you when your lungs begin to fill with fluid at 27,000 feet. Every other experienced team on the route knew these climbers were already dead. They just hadn't collapsed yet. The aftermath of these 5 choices will break your heart, because the people who paid the ultimate price were rarely the ones who made the mistakes. Mount Everest stands at 29,031 feet above sea level. In the death zone, anything above 26,000 feet, the human body is effectively dying. Cells starve, decision-making degrades into a childlike haze, and the blood thickens to the consistency of sludge. For decades, this environment was reserved for the world's most elite mountaineers. But today, the commercialization of the South Col route has created an illusion of safety. Wealthy tourists with almost no technical experience can purchase a slot on an expedition, assuming that a line of fixed ropes and a team of Sherpa guides can insulate them from danger. It is an industry built on thin margins and human endurance. And when a client brings a rookie mindset to the highest ridge on Earth, the dominoes begin to fall long before they ever leave base camp.
On May 14, 2012, the Western Cumb was frozen in an absolute suffocating silence. The temperature at Camp 2 sat at -12 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind blowing off the west shoulder at 24 knots. The air felt heavy, saturated with the low-frequency drone of nylon tents straining against their anchors. The sun was a blinding, heatless disk hanging over the Lhotse face, turning the glacial valley into a massive, reflective solar cooker during the midday hours, only to plunge it into a deep, immediate freeze the second the shadow of the peak swept across the snow. One decision triggered a sequence that would take days to fully unravel. Elliot Marsh was a 41-year-old real estate executive from Bristol, England. He wasn't there for the summit, or at least, that wasn't how he intended to make his money back. Within hours, that choice produced a crisis that the mountain would eventually solve in its own harsh way. Elliot had taken out a high-altitude rescue policy that paid out $50,000 for emergency helicopter evacuations, and he fully intended to claim it. He didn't know it yet, but that choice had already set the timeline. He had spent months reviewing the fine print of his policy back in his Bristol office, realizing that a medical evacuation from above 21,000 feet would guarantee a massive payout to cover his mounting personal credit debts. When I first worked through the numbers for this story, I kept rechecking them because the sheer audacity of planning a fake medical emergency at 21,000 feet seemed suicidal. His assigned guide was Kilu Pemba, a 34-year-old veteran who had survived the devastating 2014 Khumbu Icefall Serac collapse and held 7 verified summits, including 4 on Everest, 2 on Lhotse, and 1 on Cho Oyu. Kilu was working to pay the $4,500 annual university tuition fees for his younger brother in Delhi. Every season was a calculated gamble against his own survival to keep that kid in school. Kilu noticed Elliot was intentionally hyperventilating in his tent, dropping his own oxygen saturation readings by holding his breath before the pulse oximeter was attached. He watched him carefully from across the small tent space, tracking how the digital numbers flickered unnaturally on the screen. Elliot actually told Kilu directly, "The permit system is just a money grab, and these insurance companies have more cash than they know what to do with." Kilu formally warned the expedition manager that Elliot's symptoms did not match altitude sickness, noting that his lungs were completely clear of fluid sounds and his cognitive functions were perfectly intact when he wasn't being actively observed. The agency management dismissed the concern because Elliot was a high-paying client with powerful corporate connections in Kathmandu who had promised to fund their marketing budget for the next 3 years. Elliot's behavior escalated, and he began demanding a satellite phone to call his insurance provider directly to initiate the emergency protocol. Kilu quietly accepted the situation, stopped reporting this behavior to the base camp manager, and simply watched. The margin Elliot thought he had never existed. On the ascent toward Camp 3 at 23,000 feet, Elliot insisted on pushing higher to make the fake evacuation look more plausible on the insurance report, aiming for a dramatic rescue backdrop on the open slopes. That was the mistake. By 9 a.m., the heat on the Lhotse face was intense, causing Elliot to experience genuine, severe dehydration because he had refused to drink his allocated water to make his lips look cracked and blue for the camera. Kilu called for an immediate turnaround, but Elliot refused, claiming he just needed to rest on the fixed line. And that's the moment the next problem began. began. A sudden weather shift dropped visibility to 10 feet, trapping them on the open blue ice. The delay meant their supplemental oxygen cylinders ran out 4 hours before they could reach safety. Kilu was forced to drag Elliot down through the steep terrain severely, straining his own knee when an old injury flared up during the descent. Elliot's body failed completely as true high-altitude cerebral edema set in, triggered by the prolonged exposure without oxygen. The triage decision below the yellow band was a matter of cruel arithmetic. Kilu had to leave Elliot secured to a permanent anchor point while he crawled down to get assistance. When rescuers returned, Elliot was dead, his body frozen in a sitting position. I keep coming back to the
Aspen, Colorado. 112,000 followers, mostly of affluent people dreaming about mountain properties. Her climbing resume was Aconcagua and Denali. By most measures, she was a competent climber. What she wasn't was humble. During acclimatization, she made it clear the process was tedious. She complained about food, pace, accommodations. She called one of the Sherpas adorably slow. She wore designer gear and called the expedition company standard equipment for beginners. Mingma Rai was 29, the same age as Tessa, 11 years of guiding. He was building a trekking lodge in the Khumbu with his wife, and this season was the down payment on the land. The lodge represented permanence, the first asset they'd owned together, the first piece of a future that felt solid. During the second rotation to Camp 2, Tessa wandered off the established route. Not far, maybe 100 meters, but far enough that the rope team lost visual. Mingma found her 20 minutes later, calm and confused about why anyone was concerned. She'd simply taken a different path. Mingma raised it with the leader. She needs to stay with the rope. She's not staying clipped. The leader talked to her. Tessa said it was a misunderstanding that she'd stay closer. Then, privately, she told other climbers that Mingma was being overly cautious and treating her like a child. Mingma knew about the comment. Word travels in small camps. He didn't say anything. He kept guiding. By May 12th, the weather window was opening. Forecast called for clear through May 16th. At 11:30 p.m. on May 14th, the team left Camp 4. The climb went smoothly. By dawn, they were at South Summit. By noon, the final ridge stretched toward the true summit. Tessa was moving well. At 1:15 p.m., the wind shifted. Not gradually, shifted, like a door opening on a different room's weather. Wind came from the east, from gentle to 50 miles an hour in 40 seconds. With the wind came clouds, not fog. Clouds like a wall. Visibility dropped from 300 meters to 30 meters. Within 5 minutes, maybe 6 meters. Within 10 minutes, maybe 3 feet. Mingma called for them to slow and move carefully following the fixed line. The turnaround time had been 2 p.m. It was now 1:47 p.m. Mingma called, "We go back now." 2. Much wind. Tessa called back, "I can see the summit. It's right there." It wasn't. The visibility was maybe 3 feet. The summit was another 200 meters away. Mingma turned around. He was moving back toward the south summit, following the fixed line. He assumed Tessa was behind him. She wasn't. The fixed rope has anchor points every 30 meters. There are gaps. The route isn't perfectly marked. In a whiteout, intuition becomes lethal. Tessa was following what she thought was the fixed line. Wasn't. It was a wind-formed ridge that looked like a line, white on white. Mingma was maybe 40 meters ahead when he realized he couldn't hear her anymore. He turned and called her name. Nothing. He retraced. The rope was there. The route was there. But Tessa wasn't. She had diverged onto a slope that wasn't the route. He keyed the radio. "Climber has gone off route. Severe whiteout. Can't locate." The search happened in real time. Climbers above roped down. They spread out. They called her name. Into the white. Someone found her footprints. They led southwest, away from the route, down a slope that wasn't the standard descent. The footprints went about 60 meters, then stopped. There was a gully below. It dropped straight down for maybe 600 feet. Her body was found by a climber from a different expedition the next morning about 400 feet down. Injuries from impact. Mingma turned around during the whiteout, expecting to find her behind him. Instead, he found absence. The lodge he'd been, saving for her, the land with the view of the mountains. All of it felt suddenly fragile. because he just watched someone die because they'd refused to accept that the mountain knew more than they did. And then there's the last one. A climber who didn't just lie to the mountain, he lied to himself, and kept lying until the lie was all that was left.
On May 11th, 2018, the South Col was a frozen wasteland swept by 50-knot winds that made the ambient temperature of -28 feel twice as cold. The tents at Camp 4 were flapping like machine guns, the fabric snapping so loudly that conversation was impossible without shouting directly into someone's ear. Nathan Kroll was a 46-year-old tech founder from Newport Beach who had promised his corporate tech sponsors a summit photo in exchange for a $150,000 payout. The problem was that Nathan had no intention of going to the top. His plan was to forge the GPS logs using a tracking emulator software he developed, take a staged photo at Camp 3, and claim the money. That decision triggered his isolation. He didn't realize it yet, but that choice had already set the timelines. Genuinely could not understand how anyone signed off on it when I looked at his logistical logs. Nathan was paired with C.H. Wong Lundup, a 41-year-old mountaineer from the Fortsy Valley who possessed 14 summits across the highest peaks in the world, including 9 on Everest. This was scheduled to be C.H. Wong's final season before planned retirement to manage his family's ancestral farm. C.H. Wong noticed Nathan was spending hours inside his tent with a laptop connected to a satellite terminal, adjusting the altitude coordinates on his emergency beacon. When Swang confronted him, Nathan dismissed him completely, stating that his technical data was none of a guide's business and that he paid for discretion, not an audit. The agency owners, anxious to maintain their relationship with a wealthy tech executive, told C.H. Wong to mind his own logistics and let the client manage his tracking devices. Nathan's deception escalated when he slipped out of his tent at midnight into the high-altitude dead zone, intending to walk up to a higher ridge alone to create a realistic movement variation on his digital track. Swang quietly followed him into the dark without a radio, knowing the danger Nathan was walking into. At 26,000 feet, a sudden, blinding whiteout navigation failure struck the mountain. Nathan lost the trail completely within minutes, the margin he thought he had never existed. Swang caught up to him near the Geneva Spur, but Nathan panicked in the dark, stumbling off the edge of the standard route and pulling Swang down into an exposed rock couloir. They were forced into a hypothermia bivouac without shelter or sleeping bags. Swang used his own body to shield the tech executive from the direct wind, destroying his own fingers to frostbite in the process. Nathan's body failed by 4 a.m. as hypothermia stopped his heart. Swang survived, but the cost was absolute. He lost 3 fingers on his right hand, making manual labor on his family farm impossible. The retirement he had worked 14 summits to secure was ruined. Real quick, if you've made it this far, you're clearly invested in these stories, and that's exactly who this channel is for. A like or subscribe tells the algorithm to keep pushing this kind of content. All right, back to the...
It was April 29, 2017, on Mount Everest, where the weather window that feels infinite at base camp closes the moment it wants. Logan Petros was 32 from Jackson, Wyoming, a base jumper and wingsuit creator with 167,000 followers, watching him jump off cliffs. He'd leveraged that audience into a secondary career as a lifestyle personality. His brand was above the noise. The gap between his image and his ability was the size of a crevasse. He'd never climbed Everest, Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, Aconcagua, all guided, all successful, all unremarkable. But in interviews and posts, he casually referenced my summits on Everest, plural. He mentioned previous experience at altitude that sounded like 4 expeditions. None of it was true. He was building his reputation on a foundation of lies. Karma Boat was 36, 16 years of guiding, 8,000 meter summits. He was guiding because his younger brother was in nursing school in Kathmandu, and the tuition was expensive, and Karma had committed to funding it for 3 years. This expedition was the beginning of the end of that commitment. From base camp, Karma could read climbers. He guided hundreds. He knew within a day which ones had actually been at altitude. Logan was performing. His confidence was too high for someone whose body hadn't seen 26,000 feet. During the rotation to Camp 2, Karma tried to show Logan proper cramponing technique, the angle of the boot, the bite of the points, the self-arrest position. Logan said he knew it. He'd done this before, which meant he'd done a Aconcagua, where the slopes are gentler, the ice is softer, The consequences of poor technique are delayed. Karma let it go. You can't teach humility on a mountain. By April 27th, the weather opened. The forecast was favorable. At 11 p.m. on April 28th, Logan and Karma and 3 other climbers left Camp 4 for the summit. The climb was clean. By mid-morning, they'd passed the south summit and were moving toward the final ridge. This is where the difficulty increases. The snow transitions to blue ice, glacial ice, compressed for decades, offering almost no purchase. You need precise technique. You need respect. Logan moved fast. Karma called for him to slow. Logan ignored him, didn't hear, didn't care, moved fast. The lie about his previous summits had given him a false confidence his body didn't actually have. Around 12:40 p.m., Logan hit a section of exposed blue ice. His crampons didn't bite. The technique was all wrong. His foot slipped. He tried to self-arrest. The ice axe didn't find purchase. It slid across the surface. He fell. The rope became taut. Karma was anchored above, but the angle was bad and the fall had momentum. Karma braced. The anchor held. Logan was hanging above a gully, unable to climb back up. Karma rappelled down and helped him back onto the route. They regrouped. Logan was shaken but unhurt. His crampons had bent slightly, the metal twisted enough that the points didn't align anymore. Logan said he was fine. Karma said they should go down. The bent crampon was a liability. Logan refused. He'd just fallen, was ashamed. The only way to recover from that shame was to summit. Karma accepted it. You can't force people down a mountain. They continued. By 1:20 p.m., they were near the final ridge. Logan reached the summit at 1:47 p.m. He spent 15 minutes filming. During descent, about 40 minutes below the summit, Logan hit another ice section. Both crampons failed. The bent metal on one side, combined with poor technique, meant neither foot was secure. He fell again. This time, Karma's position was awkward. The rope angle was steep. The fall pulled him. The anchor held, but barely. Logan was hanging again, this time for longer. It took Karma 15 minutes to get him back to the route. They spent the night at Camp 4. The next morning, they started the final descent. Logan had been awake all night, replaying the falls, replaying the moment where Karma had called for descent, and he'd refused. The shame was becoming unbearable. The lie was becoming visible. As they packed to descend, Logan suggested an alternate route, a steeper slope that would be faster. Karma said they should follow the established route. Logan said the established route was unnecessarily cautious. Karma said they were descending the established route. For once, Logan listened. But eager to make up time, he moved fast. There was a final traverse, a short section of hard ice before the slope opened to easier terrain. Logan moved across it quickly, too quickly. His bent crampons caught. He stumbled. Karma saw. Logan's body went forward. His feet came up. He was sliding on his back down a slope angled at maybe 45 degrees. The gully below was maybe 400 feet deep. He slid for about 80 feet. Then his shoulder caught a rock outcrop and his body rotated. He tumbled the rest of the way. Karma heard the last impact echo off the canyon walls. Karma had to descend the rest of the way, knowing that the body above had just become a recovery effort instead of a rescue. The body was found the next day. The bent crampons were retrieved, evidence of the poor technique, evidence of the falls, evidence of the lies. The expedition company investigated. The report noted. Climber had misrepresented his climbing experience. Cramponing technique was below standard. Fall resulted from equipment failure and technique failure, which is technically true and entirely beside the point.
On May 19, 2016, the Lhotse face was a chaotic bottleneck of flashing headlamps and strained breathing. The temperature was -22, and the jet stream was screaming over the summit ridge at 35 miles per hour. The ice underneath their crampons was hard as concrete, a dull, featureless blue that offered very little purchase for anything less than a perfectly placed steel point. Renata Cavalcante was a 33-year-old wellness influencer from Sao Paulo who owned a lucrative online fitness brand. She had traveled to Nepal with a forged climbing permit, having photoshopped previous clients' document and used a series of low-level bribes to bypass the ministry office in Kathmandu. She wanted the content, but she didn't want to pay the $11,000 government fee. That decision triggered a logistics nightmare. Renata believed her online status made her untouchable. She actually told another climber at base camp, "The permit system is just a government money grab for people who don't have a platform." When I was piecing this together, that line came up over statements and over in witness statements. Her guide was Sherpa, a 28-year-old who had completed the Advanced Altitude Medicine program at the Khumbu Climbing Center and held summits on Everest and Manaslu. Sherpa's entire motivation for the season was his daughter's private school fees in Kathmandu, which cost $2,800 annually. Sherpa was a methodical professional, but because Renata was operating on an illegal, unlisted permit, they were forced to climb during off-peak hours to avoid the official liaison officers at the major camps who checked paperwork before dawn. This choice meant they were moving up the Lhotse face during a period when the fixed lines were completely unmonitored by the route fixing team. Sherpa raised concerns about the condition of the old ropes they were using to avoid the main lines, pointing out that the ice anchors were melting out under the afternoon sun. Renata's agency manager dismissed the warning, telling Sherpa to keep her moving. Before anyone noticed her lack of registration paperwork, Renata's entitlement escalated as she began taking long breaks on the face to film promotional videos for her sponsors. She would unclip from the line entirely to get a better angle for her phone, ignoring the drop below her. Sherpa stopped arguing and simply tracked her oxygen usage. Near the top of the face at 24,500 feet, Renata ignored a direct instruction to clip into a secondary backup anchor while shifting her weight. Within hours, that choice produced a catastrophic failure. The main rope anchor blew out under the combined weight of Renata and two other illegal climbers who had followed her line to avoid detection. Sherpa was jerked off his feet, his shoulder dislocating instantly as he caught the load on his safety tether. Renata fell 600 feet down the ice, her body stopping near the edge of a bergschrund. I keep circling back to the physical reality of the scene her bare hands were frozen solid into the ice because she had taken her outer mittens off to manipulate her phone camera. That kind of loyalty doesn't get written about enough, but Sherpa spent 3 hours in total darkness, resetting his own shoulder against an ice screw just to descend to her position. Renata died from massive internal trauma before he reached her. Sherpa's injury left him with permanent nerve damage, ending his career as a high-altitude guide. He was 28 when he retired from high-altitude work. 28. The private school fees could no longer be paid, and his daughter returned to their rural village school the following autumn.